Hello everyone, my name is An Phương, and today I'm going to talk about my experience on stereotypes, my opinions on stereotypes, and actions that can help us combat with the single story, and how I define the single story will be mentioned in my presentations. Okay, so first, I will tell you about my experience on stereotypes. Okay, so I read a lot of English books. When I was young, my mom didn't have a lot of times with me, so she has me reading English books to improve my English, and that's when I didn't realize at first, but I always portrayed setting in my books as places that usually didn't exist in Vietnam, because I read so many English books that my mind and my concept inside me always pictured books. It has to have foreign people and foreign maybe settings, and how foreign people speak about something. And when I grow up, I write books, and I always portrayed the settings of my books as foreign places, for example in England or in Paris, but I never included anything about Vietnamese people or Vietnamese places in my books. I always described my characters with features of foreign people, for example, blue eyes and brown hairs and pale skin, but I never include anything about Vietnamese people or Asian people having maybe dark hair or something that relates to Asian people, or specifically Vietnamese people. And after I wrote my books, I brought it to my family for them to read, and they asked me a question that I still ponder up to today. Why don't you include Vietnamese people in your books? And that question has me wondering why, and I was still pondering that question until today. A few years later, when I had more experience in middle school, and I changed where I learned, I realized that I had been reading over and over again a single story. So a single story, in my definition, creates stereotypes and assumptions about something. It can be like a group of people, or an object, or a place. And because I form a motive in my mind about how characters and settings has to be like in a book, because I read so many English books. And later on, I realized that I've been associated with a single story. It is a one-sided narrative that oversimplifies something that as the only truth. For example, when you're young, when you're like just a kid, you heard your parents and your grandparents went traveling to other countries, and they came back and they told you that, the Eiffel Tower is really magnificent, and it's like pictures in real life. And when you grow up, you always pictured Paris, and specifically Eiffel Tower, as something magnificent and beautiful, as your parents and your grandparents always pictured. But when it's actually one of my experience anyway. When you travel to Paris, your perspective of the Eiffel Tower changed completely, because you realize that the Eiffel Tower is so much different from what you've actually imagined in your mind. That's because your grandparents and your parents have different perspectives from you. Maybe in their time, the Eiffel Tower is actually very magnificent because at that time, in Vietnam, for example, we don't have that kind of things in here, and it's their first time seeing something like that. So they always had the first thought in mind that Eiffel Tower is beautiful and magnificent and wonderful. But when you grow up, your perspective was different from what other people before you said, because you have different choices about something too. Maybe you think something is beautiful, but other people would have different perspective of it because they have different experience with the word beautiful before you. So this is something that the single story can shape how people shapes stereotypes. But my experience on the Eiffel Tower and my books, my writing experience is an example of positive stereotypes. But there are also negative stereotypes as well. For example, stereotypes that shaped and portrayed by the powerful ones. Power determines who tells the story, how they are told, and which ones becomes the definitive narratives. Okay, for example, my perspective on stereotypes was usually seen in history. Imagine when two countries was fighting each other and one of them wins. Who do you think which one will write about the history? Obviously it will be the winner because they have more power to shape what the truth is. And they use the truth to have more power. So it's like a two equation, like power equals writing history, and writing history again equals power. So I will take an example. For example, Western countries, a long time ago, they have more power to write about their own history. So people like me can be more associated with their stories. That's why I have a single story in mind about how their people talk and how their people looks like. So power determines who tells the story, how they're told, and what becomes the definitive narrative, which is the single story. So how to combat the single story? Because a single story is not good for our society. If we keep a stereotype, for example, indigenous people are always poor, or those stereotypes like that. For example, Asian people are good at math. It will make our society morph into you know how printers print papers, right? It is always be in a shape, a size that it's not always flowing, and people often seen the single story as the truth, but it is not. So you have to actively look for and listen to multiple perspectives and stories about something, or different backgrounds. By talking to different people, the story that you heard over and over again, and you believe in that, doesn't mean that other people's perspective on it is not true. People may have different backgrounds and different perspective, and you always have to respect them on that, and you always have to be open-minded for other truth as well. You cannot just hear a single story over and over again and assume that it is the only truth and it always has to be the truth. You also have to understand every culture and individual that has overlapping, rich and varied narrative rather than a single definitive trait. By understanding culture and different individual, you will understand that nothing is the same as the story that you heard. History books or textbooks is just like an overview of how the world is. But if you want to create your own values and your own opinions about something, you will have to go out there and seek people with different backgrounds, different perspective from you, and that's when you will have a whole story of how the world is. It is like a Lego, and you've only had pieces and pieces. It's very vague, but you have to go out there and seek the other parts of the Lego, and you place them together to create something whole. And the pieces that you have in your collections originally isn't what you will keep to shape your full Lego, because that is not the whole Lego that you have. You have to go out there and seek new pieces. Summary of my presentation. I talk about my experience on stereotypes, negative and positive stereotypes, about how power can shape the truth, about how power can shape stereotypes and shapes assumptions for other people that doesn't have much power as them. And the last one is how to combat the single story. So remember, you don't have to believe in the single story that you heard over and over again. You have to shape your own perspective by listen, respect other people, respect other cultures, and don't assume things about other culture. It will hurt them. Thank you so much.